The light superheats the air to 100 million degrees Celsius. That's
not at the building. Today we're going to be looking at a channel called Fern. Specifically, Tsar Bomba, the biggest nuke in history. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Tyler Folse. I'm a nuclear engineer with a little over 10 years of experience in the commercial nuclear power industry. From engineering to operations to emergency response. I claim to know everything there is nuclear, but I can certainly share some knowledge. Resolution's different.
This is Little Boy, the atomic bomb that devastated.
Said 20,000 tons of TNT or 20 kilotons. The estimate I'm used to hearing is 15 kilotons. 20 kilotons is closer to Fat Man, though there are some sources like President Truman said it was 20 kilotons, even though he was the president, not the person that designed it. But still, rough order of magnitudes, right?
Hiroshima. This is the H-bomb Castle Bravo, the most powerful nuclear weapon the United States has ever detonated.
Now, 15 megatons for Castle Bravo, so on the order of 1,000 times more powerful in terms of energy yield.
And this is RDS-220, also known as Tsar Bomba, the emperor of all bombs.
50 megatons.
It was built in the Soviet Union.
That's the tested version. I'm sure he'll get into it. There was even a proposed design of 100 megatons, which is ridiculous.
Here, it was called Big Ivan. Russia recently declassified secret footage of its 1961 detonation.
There it goes. That's bright.
At 50 megatons, Tsar Bomba is the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated. It yielded the most powerful human-made explosion in history, about 3,800 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. If dropped over a major city, the consequences would be unimaginable. And if it were...
Good luck getting it to a major city, though, since that bomb is going to be mounted on a bomber with its bomb bay open with such a big, juicy radar cross-section. Easy to intercept, even back in 1961. So, not a practical weapon.
A last-minute decision. It would have been twice as powerful, and perhaps twice as catastrophic. The lead physicist who engineered it was so unsettled by his creation that he devoted the rest of his life to campaigning against the nuclear arms race.
Twice as catastrophic, depends how you measure a catastrophe, but one interesting thing is, like, the blast radius does not scale linearly by doubling the yield. So it's not going to double the blast radius going from 50 megatons to 100 megatons. Like, for instance, the fireball for a B-83 nuclear weapon, which is about a megaton, has a fireball radius of a little over a kilometer. And this 50 megaton has a fireball radius that's closer to 5 kilometers, not 50 kilometers.
This is the surprisingly unknown, terrifying story of Tsar Bomba.
Was that an image of it causing this massive shockwave throughout the poles?
It's the end of the 50s. The Soviets and the Americans are neck and neck in the nuclear arms race, but the Americans are winning, and Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the Soviet Union, knows it. Tensions between the two superpowers have cooled down a bit in recent years. Khrushchev and US President Eisenhower have recently met, and both expressed a desire for more harmony. In 1958, they both agreed to a voluntary test ban moratorium on nuclear weapons. Worldwide, many are hopeful that a peaceful coexistence is on the horizon.
Yeah, the Cold War wasn't even at its peak yet.
In May of 1960, the Soviet Union and the United States are scheduled to meet in Paris for a summit. One of the main points on the agenda is disarmament. They hope to formalize a test ban treaty of nuclear weapons. Both leaders, and the world at large, are well aware of how existentially dangerous nuclear warfare is. But just a few days before the summit, it all goes south. Tensions bubble to a rolling boil when an American spy plane is shot down from deep within Soviet territory.
The U-2 incident.
The Americans claim that it was just a weather plane that's been blown off course, but the Soviets are able to present evidence that the plane was indeed used for espionage.
It's always what it is. It's always a weather plane or a weather balloon.
Captured pilot admits he works for the CIA. The Americans' lie turns into a PR disaster for the Eisenhower administration. Khrushchev opens the Paris summit with an enraged rebuke of the United States. He demands an apology from Eisenhower. The US president refuses, and Khrushchev storms out. No treaty is signed. Khrushchev thinks he needs to show the world how tough and formidable the Soviet Union is. He's famously prickly, impulsive, and aggressive. A few years ago, he told Western powers, "History is on our side. We will bury you."
Now, I've heard this "we will bury you" quote. Someone that knows Russian better, please correct me on this, but I thought that was a mistranslation, and the real statement was something more like, "we will outlive you." I mean, he was proven wrong either way, so it doesn't really matter, but still. I know "we will bury you" is a quote that's thrown around a lot.
Now is the time to put his money where his mouth is. Because of the temporary ban on testing, innovation efforts on both sides of the arms race have slowed. They're both focused on steadily growing their supply, building more bombs instead of developing new tech. Not all breakthroughs have to be destructive. Sometimes technology is being developed to help us, like Live, and start building your own website for free. In 1961, the Americans inaugurate John F. Kennedy as their new president. Khrushchev has no respect for him. He sees him as young, inexperienced, and weak. This might be the perfect moment to show the world what the Soviet Union is capable of. So he summons scientists from Artemis-16, the Soviet Los Alamos, to the Kremlin. He tells them it's time to break the test ban moratorium and start testing nukes again. One of these scientists is Andrei Sakharov. He's a star physicist for the Soviet effort. He led the creation of a staged thermonuclear weapon, independently of any intelligence gathered from the Americans. He's called the father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb. But Sakharov has become uneasy with his role in the arms race. He's found that even testing the weapons is catastrophically lethal, even if no human is within the blast radius. He has calculated that for every megaton of nuclear weapons detonated, there would be over 6,600 premature deaths worldwide due to the cancers and genetic abnormalities produced by the radioactivity.
Okay, I know where this comes from. This is from the very conservative and arguably outdated model known as the linear no threshold model. Also, I'm sure this quote is taken a bit out of context in that obviously it depends where you set these things off. I mean, if you're closer to an urban center, you could potentially get a lot more than 6,000. But if we're just talking cancer, radiation-induced cancers by themselves, this is based on a model called the linear no threshold model. And what that means is every dose of radiation you get that's above background radiation increases your risk of cancer. Now, this model does not hold up at low dose rates. So low dose activities such as eating a banana or cuddling your spouse, according to the linear no threshold model, would increase your chance of getting cancer. This is in contrast to the linear threshold model, which has a number, 100 millisieverts, where the increased risk of cancer becomes more apparent. And that's because there are data points to suggest for people that have been tested that have received dose rates above that level that are correlated with increased cancer risk. However, when you extrapolate it downward, there's no empirical data to support this. And since the nuclear weapons testing, there haven't been that many more increased cancer rates. Now, it's possible that this model may have existed at the time, and in 1961, I would not be surprised. And if anything, I mean, having a compelling reason not to set off nuclear weapons, I get it. But it is an exaggeration. But fallout exposure was lower than assumed, and other estimates from the United Nations, from the Environmental Protection Agency, suggest this 6,000 figure is quite high. Even the conservative estimate from the Chernobyl accident predicts 4,000. And it's 4,000 over an extended period of time, despite that it released 400 times the fallout from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even though it was far less the yield. We're talking a few tons of TNT. Chernobyl was not a nuclear bomb going off. It was a reactor's roof getting blown. It was a reactor core getting blown to pieces in such a violent way that it took the roof off, but nothing compared to the destructive power of nuclear weapons. So even scaling it by kilotons or megatons is not the right way to evaluate fallout levels. It's all about the materials. And hydrogen bombs actually release less fallout per kiloton or per megaton than weapons such as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the pure fusion atomic bomb. But I guess it's possible that that's what people believed back then.
Even if these deaths occur very gradually, over thousands of years, his conscience still can't take it.
Can't take it over thousands of years? Dude, over thousands of years, there's so many compounding variables. He's a scientist, right?
So he tells Khrushchev that it's unnecessary to test anymore. Isn't it enough to have built the bombs and only use them in an absolute last resort scenario? They already know their tech is good. Khrushchev is furious. Sakharov, don't try to tell us what to do or how to behave. We understand politics. I'd be a jellyfish and not chairman of the Council of Ministers if I listened to people like Sakharov.
I'd be a
Khrushchev
jellyfish.
demands that the scientists make
A jellyfish, like a weakling, someone that folds. I mean, a lot of these popularized Khrushchev quotes portray him in that sort of way, that it's all about the strength of the glorious Soviet Union.
suggestions. What kind of bombs should they develop?
Also,
There's not a lot of new ideas ready to be tested due to the recent focus on stockpiling over innovating. So someone simply suggests going bigger. Why not 100 megatons?
100's a nice round number.
Khrushchev loves the idea and latches onto it.
Just bigger, don't say a reason for anything, even though 100 megatons in one weapon, probably not the best, most efficient way to destroy your enemy, since a lot of the blast is just going to go up into the upper atmosphere anyway, and it's going to minimize the amount of damage to the surface, which is where the enemy assets are. There's a reason why we stopped making nuclear weapons as big as possible, and now it's all about making them difficult to intercept and precise. But here we have the height of the really, really big nuke era, the multi-megaton nuke era.
100 megatons is an absurdly high number. Up until that point, the most powerful bomb ever detonated was Castle Bravo, a 15 megaton bomb the Americans tested.
A 15 megaton bomb they thought was only 10 or 12. I forget the exact number, but they ended up being bigger than they thought it was, and yeah, that was a whole other mess.
In 1954, the total blast power expended in all of World War II is 3 megatons, and that includes the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And that's really just illustrating how ridiculous it was, because the overall destructive effects of World War II, this isn't 33 times more destructive than all of that. This weapon isn't attacking billions.
Plans to test bombs in this megaton range have been halted because the effects of such a large weapon were unknowable. Scientists weren't able to reliably predict meteorological conditions at the time, which would affect the severity of the radioactive fallout and how far the particles could travel.
That is one thing that is looked at a nuclear power plant, how you decide what areas to evacuate, if you recommend evacuation versus shelter in place during an accident. It's mainly about the weather. The health physics professionals that do that are experts in radiation dose and what you need to do to make yourself safe from radiation, they're essentially minor in meteorology. So they can look at wind patterns, directions, storms, that sort of thing. It's kind of interesting how much you look at the weather at a nuclear power plant. That's one of the reasons why a typical nuclear power plant has 2 meteorological towers.
For all they know, such an enormous blast could engulf Moscow in a cloud of poisonous radiation.
Depends where you set it off.
What could even be gained from testing 100 megatons? For Khrushchev, it's obvious. The Soviet Union would assert its dominance.
Clearly to compensate for political weaknesses.
Let the 100 megaton bomb hang over the capitalists like a sword of Damocles. And so the race to build the biggest, deadliest bomb the world will...
Good luck getting it near the capitalists to, and them not shooting it down.
...see is underway.
That thing was very big and bulky.
Sakharov is still uneasy about the risks of testing nuclear weapons. He's the best of the best, so he ends up leading the team of physicists. He hopes that this, at least, will be the last atmospheric test ever required. Maybe from this one absurdly big blast, the Soviet Union would learn what they need to know and move on. That, unfortunately, would not be the case. The project's timeline is grueling. Khrushchev insists that from initial conception to detonation, the scientists get exactly 16 weeks. So Sakharov's team is building while still designing. In just 4 months, they...
That is setting yourself up for scope creep if you do that with any sort of project like this. I mean, yeah, you can do that with maybe software, but when you're building a physical thing, oh my.
A design for an entirely untested yield range. They build the bomb, they construct the fissionable and fusionable materials into the correct shapes, and formulate a
I've never heard the term fusionable. And fissionable is distinctive from fissile in that it's things that could potentially fission under certain conditions. It includes stuff like uranium-238, which can fission via a fast neutron, but it's not likely to happen. Especially in a typical nuclear power plant, fast fusion isn't very common, but technically not wrong, because fissionable would include things that are fissile, like uranium-235 or plutonium-239. Also plutonium-241 in weapons. One good rule of thumb is it's generally the odd number guys that are fissile for some reason. Though that's not always the case. It's just a quick reference.
For an allegedly safe test. They hope for the best. The team is forced to skip crucial parts of the design process. There isn't even time for mathematical analysis. Instead, they're working with approximations. Doubts start to creep in. Will it even work? And
yeah, definitely some safety concerns here. I mean, you're designing something that's supposed to explode, and you're going to be off. I mean, there's a chance that the thing could even fizzle out. Or you can be like Castle Bravo, and the thing's way bigger than you thought it was.
How dangerous is this really? Either way, they're about to find out. In October 1961, Khrushchev formally announces to the world that the Soviets are retreating from the test ban agreement. He cites US aggression as the reason. He hints his scientists are developing...
Interesting he's using the word retreating.
...in the megaton range. Now that the world knows what Sakharov's team is up to, the pressure is on for the physicists to deliver a viable weapon. Otherwise, the whole point, propaganda value, would be lost. The world reacts with fear, outrage, and protest. In response, the Americans abandon the test ban moratorium as well, and start vigorously testing nukes again themselves. The Kennedy administration denounces the Tsar Bomba as pointless terrorism, nothing but a propaganda weapon. But recently declassified documents...
I mean, that's basically what it is, but then again, the US is testing weapons too, so...
...indicate that Kennedy's administration considered emulating it, all while denouncing it publicly. The UN appealed to the Soviets...
That sounds like typical Cold War behavior. It's like, how dare you test this weapon? Which is really, darn it, I wanted to do it first.
...cancel the plan. But Khrushchev pushes forward. At the end of October, Tsar Bomba is ready. It is in and of itself enormous. A weapon with 100 megaton explosive power needs a lot of uranium and fission fuel, so Big Ivan is roughly the size of a school bus, 8 meters long and weighs 25 tons.
Yep.
The bomb is so bulky that it needs its own specially modified plane to deliver the payload. It doesn't really make sense to make bombs this big. It's just not strategic. If actually used in battle, Tsar Bomba would be easy to spot lumbering through the sky.
Thank you for getting this right. There's a lot of sources out there and a lot of people that are afraid of this weapon. That's like, dude, you do realize this thing is ridiculously ineffective in combat. I'm not even a military expert, but it doesn't take a military expert to realize how easy it is with this big old honking thing sitting out of its bomb bay. How easy this thing is going to be able to spot and intercept, even back then.
And could be quickly shot down. And it's too bulky to deliver via missile. In the decades since Tsar Bomba, the nuclear weapon...
Especially back then, you'd have to essentially make... you'd have to put it on some crazy, big, super multi-stage rocket that would be way more expensive than it's worth.
It's focused on developing smaller warheads. These are far easier to deploy. The largest nuclear weapon in the US arsenal today is about 40 times less powerful than Tsar Bomba. Even in 1961, it was generally understood that bigger isn't necessarily better. That's because explosive power doesn't correspond one-to-one with blast damage. Explosions scale at the cubic root, not linearly. So while a 100 megaton bomb indeed releases 10 times more energy than a 10 megaton bomb, it will only damage about twice as much area. American newspapers at the time characterized Khrushchev's experiments as not only horrifying, but idiotic.
Yeah, that's why their design would later shift to the MERV design, where you make where you have a missile, an ICBM, have a bunch of smaller warheads, and it would essentially cluster bomb, kind of like this image right here, except the blast would be a lot bigger than that, but still, where you have instead of these multi-megaton things, you would have several of them in the hundreds of kiloton range to maximize damage to the surface.
Out that if 5 weapons at 5 megatons each are detonated, they will cause damage to far more area than a 150 megaton super bomb. And these smaller bombs are far easier to deliver.
Yes.
But actual use is not the point of Tsar Bomba. It wasn't built for war. It was built for glory. It's meant to make the world tremble at the thought of Soviet power. It's a city destroyer, to be used only as an absolute last resort.
I was going to say, you're probably more likely to destroy your own city just by some sort of accidental mishap, considering the amount of safety cuts that were put into this design project.
The blast damage radius could be roughly calculated. The remote Arctic island, Novaya Zemlya, is chosen as a site. It's one of the main nuclear test sites of the Soviet Union because they figure it's far enough away to not bother any humans. But radioactive fallout is more difficult to predict. It can vary considerably with weather conditions and weapon design. Scientists have been surprised before. The 1954 Castle Bravo test produced far more radioactivity than anticipated, requiring evacuation of the islands downwind from the test site. What is known at the time...
Part of it's you set it off at the surface. It's going to cause way more radioactive contamination than an airburst.
...is that thermal radiation scales better than blast damage in relation to explosive power, meaning a bigger blast generally means more radiation.
Thermal radiation. So thermal radiation means likelihood of setting stuff on fire or causing third-degree burns. Very different from ionizing radiation. For a mostly fusion-based weapon here, that's where the majority of the megatons are coming from, the amount of ionizing radiation on a per megaton basis is going to be relatively little compared to a pure fission-based weapon, such as the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, it's still going to be a pretty big source of radioactive material, but it's not going to be 50,000 times, but it's not going to be thousands of times more than Hiroshima in terms of radioactive material.
Makarov can't stop thinking about all the lives it will take. He's taking great care to make the Tsar Bomba as clean as can be. It's designed to minimize the release of radioactive fallout as much as possible. But still, even a relatively clean nuke like Tsar Bomba isn't safe. According to his calculations, the test of one clean 100 megaton weapon will release enough radiation that, over time, will cause 660,000 premature deaths.
That didn't happen, but he's using flawed models here.
Deaths he would be partially responsible for. So he makes one last-minute, drastic change in design. Right before the weapon test, he suggests using an inert substance like lead instead of uranium-238. This will cut the blast yield down from 100 to 50 megatons.
So what that does is it eliminates fast fission of the tamper material, which would cut the yield in half. I mean, lead is pretty good at slowing down fast neutrons, slowing down gammas as well for that matter, but here in the case we're talking about fast neutrons. It would also reduce radioactive fallout, like you said, but really it's to make it less powerful. It would also, the crew that would drop this thing out of the bomber would be much more likely to survive this.
Khrushchev agrees. He's facing a lot of backlash, so scaling back might be politically smart. As long as the triggering device works and the bomb goes off, the world will still know Tsar Bomba is capable of detonating 100 megatons if the Soviets ever feel they need to in the future, just in case they ever need to take out New York City or Los Angeles all in one go.
Again, if you spread out the material into multiple weapons, then yeah, you could destroy more major cities if you wanted to.
The pilot carrying Big Ivan soars to 10 kilometers above the archipelago, Novaya Zemlya. A smaller plane flies alongside him, ready to film the blast and monitor the fallout. The engineers believe the crew only has a 50% chance of survival. Big Ivan is designed to detonate mid-air.
Really, I don't know how true that was or if that was just something that was said, But we already know the calculations are pretty far off, so I don't know if that estimate is right. But I also wouldn't be surprised the other way either, knowing how safety wasn't exactly the biggest concern in this project.
To give the crew even a chance of escape, the bomb is outfitted with a massive parachute meant to slow the bomb's descent. It should be enough time, fingers crossed. At 11:32 Moscow time, from 4,000 meters above the ground, the bombardier drops the bomb. What exactly makes Tsar Bomba so powerful is still, partially, a mystery. Russia continues to guard that secret.
I mean, it's multiple stages, so how thermonuclear bombs work is it's a combination of nuclear fission and nuclear fusion. It has a fission primary stage, which is activated by a conventional bomb to get that thing going, a fusion secondary stage, and an additional third stage for the boosted yield. So it's going to use even more. The second stage was a fusion stage, because to cause nuclear fusion, you just need confinement time, a lot of heat, and a lot of pressure. We can't make sustainable fusion reactors yet, but we can make unsustainable fusion bombs. And this one had 2 fusion stages, also with a tamper of uranium-238 in between to just increase the amount of fast neutrons, which was what was replaced with the lead. But the full 100 megaton version used uranium-238. They weren't fusing the uranium-238, it was just an additional neutron source to further boost the yield of the weapon.
Do know is that its design is most likely different from other thermonuclear weapons. Normally, a thermonuclear weapon or hydrogen bomb consists of 2 stages. It's a nuclear bomb within a nuclear bomb. The first stage uses nuclear fission, or splitting atoms, to produce immense heat and pressure. This triggers the second stage, nuclear fusion, or combining atoms, where far more energy is unleashed. Fusion of hydrogen isotopes under extreme temperatures releases an incredibly powerful explosion, far stronger than a single-stage atomic bomb, like the one dropped on Hiroshima. The Tsar Bomba, however, is a 3-stage hydrogen bomb with an unusual triggering mechanism. What sets it apart is that it most likely uses 2 near-simultaneous primary triggers to ignite the third stage more evenly and symmetrically, maximizing its explosive power. While other 3-stage thermonuclear weapons exist, the innovative use of synchronized primary triggers is unusual, if not unique. It's long.
Okay, so what's this here? I'm seeing 2 in this diagram, 2 fission weapons, and then the secondary fusion stage.
Considered extremely difficult to achieve synchronization of primaries, but somehow Sakharov's team managed. When you detonate a thermonuclear weapon,
what I'm used to seeing is 3 stages organized like this. But it could be some secret that I don't know about. But it's definitely fission, fusion, fusion. So I don't know what that was all about. It would have to be in order to get that kind of power, because 2 fission stages simply isn't enough.
You force something into existence unlike anything else on Earth. The first fraction of a millisecond is just a luminous flash. It's silent. Light has no sound. But don't look at it directly.
I'd go even shorter time frame than that. The first few shakes, the first few nanoseconds is when all the nuclear reactions occur. So by the time you see this, the fission reaction have already happened, the fusion reactions have already happened, and all that explosive energy's got to go somewhere. So the actual nuclear reactions are ancient history by the time the fireball emerges.
Blindness from more than 80 kilometers away. Tsar Bomba's flash is seen from 1,000 kilometers, or 630 miles away. It lasts for over a minute.
It's an airburst, so you can see it from pretty far away, because it didn't hit the ground. If it was closer to the ground, you just simply wouldn't see it from that far away, because there's stuff blocking your line of sight.
Far longer than any other nuclear flash before or since. Then, tremendous heat. The light superheats the air to 100 million degrees Celsius. That's 4 to 5 times hotter than the center of the sun. A high-pressure fireball.
You need it hotter than that to induce nuclear fusion.
That's 4 to 5 times. Then, tremendous heat. The light superheats the air to 100 million degrees Celsius. That's
not at the building. That all happens right where the thing went off. Yes, you're going to have very high temperatures on the order of hundreds of millions Celsius to induce nuclear fusion. The house isn't that hot.
4 to 5 times hotter than the center of the sun.
And the part that's actually that hot isn't very big. This isn't a bad animation thus far, but the amount of area that you see on screen is not that hot.
A high-pressure fireball erupts violently and expands at several million kilometers per hour. What follows is a thunderous blast.
And again, the speed slows down much. It's going to be supersonic, but millions of kilometers per hour that's ridiculously fast. Maybe for the first couple of meters or so, but it slows down pretty quick. It's still fast. I mean, we're talking, definitely supersonic, hypersonic towards the center, but it's going to rapidly dissipate as it expands outward. Still very dangerous, but not millions of kilometers per hour.
It's likely the loudest human-made sound in history. After about 10
That's
seconds,
possible.
Tsar Bomba's bright orange fireball grows to a radius of nearly 5 kilometers. The fireball engulfs everything in its wake. The ice-covered archipelago is now red and scorched. Anything in the ring of absolute destruction, 35 kilometers, is vaporized.
35 kilometers vaporization? No, that's quite wrong. The 5 kilometers of the fireball, yeah, definitely. But the 35 kilometers, no, that's the moderate overpressure range. The moderate blast damage only extends about 25 kilometers. And here we're talking 5 psi overpressure, so not total destruction. We're talking most buildings would collapse, deaths and injuries are going to be widespread, but not 100%. Buildings aren't completely destroyed, but high likelihood of starting a fire, so they might be soon.
Ground Zero is completely leveled. Nothing. No trees, no buildings, no rocks remain. 35 seconds pass. The fireball balloons above the Earth, and the iconic mushroom cloud emerges, presiding over the hell unleashed below. It's 64 kilometers above the Earth, 7 times higher than Mount Everest, soaring above the stratosphere and piercing the mesosphere.
Yeah, that part's accurate.
All this creates a shockwave felt all around the world.
Whoa. The air pressure wave did, but not the wave of destruction, not the shock wave, not the destructible. The light blast damage range is about 73 kilometers. Now, granted, areas further out than that can experience things like broken windows, but it doesn't really take a whole lot to do. And there were reports of windows being broken several hundred kilometers away from Ground Zero, but I'm talking about like damage to like buildings, to the actual structure.
In New Zealand, it encircles the globe not once, not twice, but 3 times.
Again, we're talking about just the pressure wave where you can detect changes in atmospheric pressure.
Tsar Bomba's shockwave catches up with the planes that are 115 kilometers from the point of detonation. They drop nearly a kilometer and are nearly downed, but the pilots manage to recover control and survive. 55 kilometers away from Ground Zero, all buildings in the abandoned village of Severny are completely destroyed.
Even on this image, I don't know, they're showing a picture that's still standing, not completely destroyed. They're going to be damaged. I mean, they're well within the light damage radius, and granted, this was an abandoned village, so they probably weren't at, 100% to begin with. Yeah, it's definitely going to damage within 55 kilometers, but not completely destroyed.
1,148 kilometers away in Soviet territories, houses collapse and radio communications fail. Windows shatter as
houses collapse, maybe some windows and interference with radio, sure, but I don't know. There it sounds like someone's blaming their house collapsing on a nuclear weapon where I think they might have had a few things wrong with it already.
Ways Finland.
What do I know? I'm not an insurance adjuster.
But Big Elon's detonation doesn't kill anyone directly.
Sounded like you said Big Elon for a second. Wonder if that was intentional.
If Tsar Bomba were dropped on a city as large as New York or Washington, D.C., it would be instantly demolished.
They always want to destroy New York in these for some reason.
Concrete would explode to vanish without a trace.
I mean, yeah, at this scale, the fireball would get most of Manhattan. Heavy blast would get the rest of it. Moderate blast would go on into Newark, would go on into some of the other boroughs. Yeah.
It would evaporate.
But like I said, good luck getting this weapon to I know this is for drama, and it kind of reminds me of scenes in movies like Independence Day, but Blast is moving up way faster than these people can run. Okay, that's not bad. If this is Manhattan, yeah, it's going to vaporize a lot of it, but there's going to be a few buildings that in the heavy damage where there's like this much less, so that's actually not a bad rendition.
Tsar Bomba's fireball never made contact with the ground, and so its radioactive fallout was relatively small compared with its yield.
That's true, though by not making contact with the ground, it's actually going to cause more destruction to the ground just from its heat, pressure, vaporization. One thing that he didn't cover was the thermal radiation, so not ionizing radiation, but its ability to set stuff on fire was 59-kilometer radius. So that's one destructive aspect that wasn't talked about.
It is considered one of the cleanest nukes ever dropped. Still, its radioactivity was caught in the stratosphere and encircled the Earth for years, dispersing all across the globe.
Now, if you're dispersing your radioactivity up that high in the atmosphere and gradually making its way all over the world, it's not doing much because you're so heavily diluted with the Earth's atmosphere. So ultimately, fallout and radiation damage is more of a concern for a surface detonation because all those high-energy neutrons can activate stuff at ground zero and cause them to become radioactive. That doesn't happen as much with an airburst.
In 2018, Russian scientists found significantly high levels of radiation trapped in nearby glaciers. Those glaciers are melting at record speed into the Barents Sea.
Again, order of magnitude differences. And I don't know, nuclear weapons by themselves, they're saying now melting at record speeds. They have been recently with or without nuclear weapons. Not to mention glaciers move, so they're going to bury some isotopes like cesium-137, which is the main one that's going to be around, but not even necessarily that much because it's so widely dispersed. Ice is actually pretty good at shielding from radiation too, by the way, just like water is. I mean, after all, water is used, and it's water. Water is used to protect you from radiation at nuclear power plants. And what's interesting about ice is when water is frozen, it expands outwards, so it's creating an even longer shield.
Sea that yields up to 4.5 million tons of fish per year for human consumption. Glaciers that were previously sinks of atmospheric contaminants are now becoming secondary sources of radioactive fallout, which environmentalists predict will become increasingly relevant in the coming decades.
Environmentalists. I mean, I believe what he says when he says environmentalists predict it, but no. So it's still going to decay. When radioactive materials encase in ice, that doesn't stop it from decaying. It's... And talking about something cesium-137, half-life of 30 years, so it's gone through more than 2 half-lives at this point. It's still going to be measurable, very measurable, but it's going to be so diluted just by natural processes like glaciers moving, melting, refreezing. That's going to disperse it and dilute it.
Due to Tsar Bomba and 120 other nuclear detonations at Novaya Zemlya, indigenous populations living nearby have been exposed to significantly high radiation levels.
I'd appreciate if they put a number, because significant depends on context. Are they getting more than 50,000? Are they getting more than 50 millisieverts per year? 50,000? Are they getting more than 100 millisieverts per year? Or are we talking 1 millisievert? Are we talking less than that?
Experience higher levels of chromosomal diseases and birth defects than other populations in Russia. Facts that only emerged later because the Soviet Union covered up incidents of radiation sickness.
So a couple of things. Some of it's due to weapons testing. Some of it's due to radiological accidents that they're trying to cover up. We're talking about two different things here. Yes, there were radiological accidents and there were tests, many tests that they didn't know about. So yes, that is a real thing that people have gotten unmonitored, unknown doses. That's probably why he doesn't say how much dose they have, is because it wasn't measured, because they didn't care. That's the real scary thing.
Some locals call it the archipelago of death. Just after detonation, our Bomba test is condemned internationally and domestically. Sakharov emerges as a vocal critic of nuclear testing and of Soviet leadership. He campaigns vigorously for an end to atmospheric testing. For his efforts, he receives the Nobel Peace Prize in 1975. The Kremlin permits him from leaving the Soviet Union. to receive the award. In response to public pressure, the United States and the Soviet Union signed the Partial Nuclear Ban Treaty in 1963, which prohibits atmospheric testing. Nowadays, people often say that if Tsar Bomba was good for anything at all, it would be for catalyzing this treaty. When brought up, it's often dismissed both in the United States and the former Soviet Union.
I don't know if Tsar Bomba by itself did that. It could have been just changes in politics.
As a reckless political stunt. A weapon too impractical and dangerous to ever be attempted by anyone else. But Khrushchev...
The most dangerous aspect about this weapon was the fact that he pushed them so hard, no safety procedure, and they didn't check their calculations, and they bypassed a lot of normal safety protocols when it comes to designing something like that by just rushing this thing. That's probably the most dangerous thing. I'm actually kind of surprised that nothing worse happened as a result of that.
Hardly the only person in history intent on creating the biggest blast possible. Recently declassified files from the United States indicate that plans had been underway to build much, much bigger bombs.
Oh, not this. Okay. This was a Cold War fever dream. If he's talking about sundial.
In the 1950s, yeah. Edward Teller, father of the US hydrogen bomb, was obsessed with creating the biggest bang possible. He and his team were working on two secret projects called Nomen and Sundial. Nomen would be a 1,000 megaton bomb to set off Sundial, a 10,000 megaton bomb.
Oh, they're like little buddies. I mean, yeah, theoretically, you can keep wrapping your fission layer with fusion layers, adding tampers, but ultimately you reach a point where you just can't scale up anymore.
It's 10 billion tons of TNT.
Ridiculous.
670,000 times the power of Little Boy dropped on Hiroshima. At least enough to burn all of France, and perhaps much worse still.
If you're going just based on blast radius, then thermal radiation, then maybe, but good luck being able to set off something like this, more or less deliver it to a target.
Nothing close to that scale has been tested, and we don't know if the traditional laws will apply at that level.
If he's referring to his rule of thumb, maybe, but I'm just not sure if the thing would even work. Good luck trying to make something like that.
First proposed sundial at a secret meeting in Los Alamos, most of the scientists present expressed horror. Such an enormous blast could poison the entire planet. Unbothered, Teller and his
No, it really couldn't, even theoretically. No, this weapon wouldn't destroy the Earth. It wouldn't release enough radioactive material to poison the Earth, and by itself wouldn't even cause a mass extinction event to wipe out humanity or anything like that. But it would certainly be the most horrific thing ever. Impractical. I think the idea behind this was, again, a bizarre Cold War fever dream / cruel loser bomb. If you think you're going to lose the Cold War, just try to ruin it for everyone, and even then it wouldn't even do the best job at that. Is just ridiculousness.
Continued to build Nomen, and even planned to test it. And when the US military learned
they didn't actually build this
about the project, there was considerable enthusiasm for realizing Sundial. But thankfully, the test never occurred.
Because they realized it would never work. That was crazy. Thanks so much for the recommendation, and thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.